سلاما نائما متلازمين. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: التؤمن بالله معنى أن تعتقد أن الله موجود تنتصف بكل كمال ومنزه عن كل نفس وهو السميع البصير المتكلم حي لا يموت أبدا.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Faithful friends who were glorified by God in 1992 in a small town in England, there lived a Christian family who were known to be very devout. They lived in a quiet environment where the church was the center of their spiritual life every week. This family was never absent from the service. They were always in the front row of seats, showing how much they love and believe in Christian teachings. The husband is a teacher at a local school and is a figure who is respected by many people because of his devotion, not only to education, but also to the church. He is often involved in church activities to help other congregations and is always ready to provide assistance when needed. Meanwhile, his wife is a housewife who is very loyal to her husband, despite her calmness and patience. She has great spiritual strength. Every day she takes the time to pray in the corner of their small house, asking God for a life full of blessings and love. But even though their lives look perfect, there is one thing that has been a great hope for them for years, namely the presence of a child. They have prayed, tried, and waited patiently for their God to have offspring. Every time they pray, they earnestly hope that there will be the day they would be blessed with a child who could complete their happiness. Those prayers were finally answered. In 1992, the wife became pregnant, and 9 months later, a much-awaited boy was born. They believed that this baby was a gift from God, the answer to their prayers. For many years, the baby's first cry was greeted with tears, happiness from both parents. The baby grew up healthy and full of joy. Every day, his little laughter filled the house, becoming a source of happiness for his parents. His bright eyes and sweet smile seemed to be a sign that family life is more complete and colorful. There is nothing strange or different in the baby's development. He grows like children in general, learns to crawl, walk, and begins to say his first words with great cuteness when he is 1 year old. The baby's parents feel that this is the right time to prepare for this important moment in the child's life. As a devout Christian family, they are eagerly awaiting the ceremony. This baptism is not only a tradition, but also an official sign that the baby will be accepted into the community and prepare everything like clean white clothes for the baby. An invitation to extended family and friends, as well as choosing the church where the sacred ceremony would be held. He chose the local church, a magnificent old building with stained glass windows that emit colorful light when sunlight penetrates them. They had already scheduled the place for the ceremony. This church has the pillars and ceiling that are so sacred, and this has been a spiritual home for many years, so that it is not enough to support the children of the Christian community, who sat neatly on wooden benches. The atmosphere was so solemn and full of respect. The candles around the altar were burning softly, giving off warm light that reflected the colors of the stained glass above it. In front of the altar stood the mother with her little baby in front of the altar, which was full of love and hope. For their child who will soon be baptized, this is an important moment that has been long awaited, the moment where their child will officially become part of the church, receiving the sacred blessing of divine protection. The priest steps closer to the baby and mother while carrying a silver cup filled with holy water. His hands moved slowly, dipped his finger into the water, and prepared himself to carry out the baptism ritual. The church congregation watched attentively. No one dared to speak. All eyes were focused on the little one who was about to receive his first blessing. The mother corrected the position of the child being held, making sure the baby was calm and ready. He could feel his own heartbeat beating fast because of the excitement. For him, this was a sign of the start of a new spiritual life for the child, who would be raised in the strong faith as had been taught by his family, when the priest raised a silver cup filled with holy water and prepared to pour a few drops into it. The baby's head suddenly, the atmosphere changed in the middle of the solemn process. Everyone was silent, waiting for this sacred moment to happen. But just when the water was about to touch the baby's smooth skin, something surprising happened outside. The baby opened his mouth with a loud voice. He said, "Allah and Muhammad." The room, which was previously filled with the feeling of wisdom that ended in Matt, who was sitting on the bench, Cabot, who, to respond to the bias of the mother who was still holding her baby, felt her heart stop beating for a moment. Her eyes widened as if wondering whether she was hearing, or she looked at her mother, who was also confused. Her face was frozen because they were both shocked to find out that they were talking clearly, let alone uttering words like that. They understood how a small child might say those words. The priest who was standing in front of them was not confused. He lowered his hand, which was still holding the cup of holy water. His lips trembled because he didn't know how to bear witness. His life milk wheezes, something like this. The words that B sucks at that, something that doesn't sound like, that doesn't suck at church. Maybe it's just a baby's voice that happens to sound like two words they know. But for some others, a different feeling starts to creep up on their They couldn't ignore the impression that this wasn't a coincidence. Mel was a sign that came from God, a sign they had never seen before. Mole's small whispers could be heard in the audience. They spoke carefully, afraid of breaking the blessing. Finally, the priest tried to slowly restore calm within himself. He continued the baptism ceremony, but the atmosphere in the church had changed. Even though the words of prayer and the rite of baptism had been said, there was no longer the sense of calm that previously enveloped the procession. Everyone in the church, from the priest to the congregation, could not ignore what had happened. The mother's tears continued. The flow of feelings was so mixed that he hugged his child, as if looking for an answer, looking at the baby's Polo's face, while his close gaze was fixed in front of Boy because of Mel's child, because of the deep confusion. The incident left big questions in everyone's minds, questions that were unanswered but had an impact. What will never be forgotten are the words of Allah and Uham, as in the church environment that they have always known in the minds of many Jats. Doubts and worries arise about how they can link the names of the people with this true faith. These questions are answered by them creating the Kaban, and then the Wana people who, this will be held in music. Music, about understanding what happened, but also being a deep reflection on faith, identity, and beliefs of each. The atmosphere in the church, which should be full of joy, is now filled with questions that stir the minds and hearts of the family. The baby couldn't get rid of the thought about the incident. They sat together in the living room in meaningful silence. The mother, with her eyes still wet with tears, looked at her husband and then said it seemed like this wasn't just a coincidence. Maybe there was something bigger that wanted to happen. Presented to us as the night wore on, the doubts within them began to give way to enlightenment. Perhaps the baby's words were a call to explore deeper for a broader understanding of their faith. They realized that this spiritual journey could take them in unexpected directions, but filled with new possibilities. That night they were filled with doubt. Hope began to bloom. They were both committed to finding out more, not only for themselves but also for their child. They hoped to give the child a better understanding of life and faith. In the darkness of their night, found a new light of enlightenment, a call to explore a wider world and enrich their faith. They began to establish communication with several Muslims in the surrounding community in the hope of hearing direct perspectives on beliefs that had previously been considered foreign in small meetings. They shared stories, asked about religious practices and how the daily life of a Muslim is. Many of them are surprised to find the same values they hold even in different religious contexts. A sense of mutual understanding is built into interaction, which means the church pastor involved in the baptism ceremony feels the same calling. He doesn't want to be left behind. In searching for the meaning that haunts many of the silences of the Quran's working space in the hope of being able to calm down the weak nature of the book, the biographical books per every page he reads open new windows, enriching his understanding and perspective on beliefs that he had previously considered to be empty. He realizes that the spiritual journey is not just about found answers to fundamental questions, also about understanding the diversity of faiths and broadening his view of the limited clergy, but also opening his heart to new possibilities in inter-religious relations. After a few weeks, the atmosphere in the church had changed. The interest that initially arose from the strange incident at the baby's baptism began to change the perspective of the congregation. They found themselves involved in a more spiritual search, and more of them felt that the teachings of Islam offered the truth they had been looking for amidst this revival of the spirit. One of the oldest congregation in the church, a wise man who had long contributed in the community, decided to take a bold step. With a steady heart and deep conviction, he announced his decision to pronounce the Shahada in an emotional atmosphere. He stood in front of the congregation and declared, "I have found the truth and I want to follow it. I believe that this is the path shown to me. If there is a mixture of happiness and sadness, then this disappointment will be a way of high Makamanya. But in them and the hope of Suas, that the world is filled with sadness and engendal, that they are going along with the search they are doing about the meaning behind baby sayings. They are both starting to find answers, what they had been looking for in every literature they read and every conversation they participated in, made them increasingly convinced that Islamic teachings had deep meaning and were relevant to their lives. With hearts full of gratitude, they decided to say the Shahada. That moment became a turning point in their lives. They were in a meeting held at the church where many members of the congregation also gathered. They stood with several other church members who had also taken similar steps. In an atmosphere full of emotion and happiness, they said the Shahada, feeling the light of the new faith that entered their lives. At first it was a center of confusion. Now it has become a symbol of change and hope for their exit. The church that was filled with Christian praise, songs is now filled with learning about the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. There is a new spirit flowing among them, and it is as if they have rediscovered it. Their identity in a broader spiritual context, very warm and meaningful discussions filled the room, and a sense of mutual understanding grew between them. The story of the baby saying the name of Allah and the Prophet Muhammad spread to nearby towns and attracted the attention of many media people. The local area covered this story, and people from various backgrounds began to come to understand more deeply about this extraordinary event. Many were inspired by the changes that occurred in the church, and not a few of them wanted to find out more about the Islamic religion. And this church week is now filled with congregants sitting in a circle discussing and sharing knowledge about Islamic teachings. They listen to lectures delivered by speakers both from Muslim circles and those who have just converted to Islam. One of the most popular sessions is when members of the local Muslim community are invited to share personal experiences about their faith. The atmosphere is warm and intimate. They talk about everyday experiences as they live Islamic teachings in a modern context. The congregation listens enthusiastically, and they feel inspired by their sincerity and courage.